Thank you all for being here. By the way, this is the first time I speak in a restaurant, so if I get nervous just looking at the food, so please always keep me distracted so I don't. I mean, what I would love to always say is that Texas is actually when I was resettled as a refugee. So I'm very thankful for this state for hosting me. I was actually resettled in Houston and by YMCA International, and I have a deep connection and feeling to this state, even though now I live in the north, which in the state called New York, which is a small town for many of you. But what I also would like to say is that some of my story, we've heard some of my biography, is that a story that many of you can actually relate to. I mean, I grew up in a seemingly a moderate, and some occasions can be called liberal family. My dad is an orthopedic surgeon, my mom is a lawyer. And generally, the rule in the family is that you're either a doctor, engineer, or a failure. So I'm the latter in that regard. So if I make mistakes, please blame it on them. But the thing is, me and my dad used to have kind of a tradition of every Thursday we discuss ideas. I was introduced to ideas from Plato, to John Stuart Mill, to Adam Smith, to most of what sometimes called the Enlightenment thinkers, and also know more about the history of my background and really the culture that I grew up in and everything. So by most occasions, even though despite the stereotype that people from the Middle East might have been known as kind of more uneducated and civilized people, I think that I do come from what sometimes can be the counter stereotypes, that I come from a highly educated family. Both of my parents studied in the West. Actually, my dad studied in Edinburgh University in the United Kingdom. And that's the reason I actually learned to speak English since a very young age. Which is the reason I will say I founded Ideas Beyond Borders later on. But so kind of the instinct to kind of find the organization I have right now really has been a natural story of my growth from the moment I was born there. But the thing that is unlike many of you, I grew up my most accounts can be considered the closed society. I grew up under the regime of Saddam Hussein. For those of you who, some people say, well, Saddam was bad. I think calling him bad is a compliment. Is that calling, some of the people who are experts on Saddam say he was a mix of Nazism and Stalinism together. I think that's pretty much the most toxic mix humanity has ever created. And to give you just an anecdote of how life was there, is that I didn't know that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. Actually, we were taught an extremely different story of the Gulf War. In fact, it used to be called the mother of all battles, and we actually won that war. And there were 33 countries that tried to invade our country, and then by the help of the Iraqi army and Saddam's power, we were able to defeat the imperialist America and the Zionists and all of that. And I actually, when 2005, when after that post-war, when I started actually hearing the story, I was actually kind of shocked. Is that what? We invaded Kuwait and we were defeated, and that's the reason we had the sanctions, not anything to do with the fact that the West trying to invade us and all of that. So imagine it's like you live in a closed society in which really you only have mainly two channels. You have the channel led by Saddam himself and channel led by Uday, which is his son. And that's it. That is only your source of information. I mean, some people can relate that to North Korea nowadays, and maybe China is another example. But that is kind of the upbringing. Thank goodness it was just my childhood. I'm very thankful that I didn't live all my life under that regime. But so I was born in Babylon, which is a city, a place I think mentioned all over the place, including the Bible. But I moved to Baghdad because my dad got a job over there, and I was young. And the area I was living in was the area in which most of Saddam generals used to be at. So the moment the war happened, that was 2003, the end of the kind of my elementary school, most of the generals left the country. They moved to Jordan or neighboring countries. Some of them got a job elsewhere in other Gulf countries. Anyway, so most of these houses became empty. So all of a sudden, a neighborhood that used to be pretty much the general's neighborhood, now suddenly an empty neighborhood. As a result, there was a transfer between these houses to Al-Qaeda. Suddenly now the militants start occupying either by consent that these generals have actually given the houses to them, or they took them by force. And that is kind of the chaotic post-Iraq war situation in which really everything was destruction and chaos. So suddenly from a neighborhood that used to be relatively safe, everything was relatively good, suddenly now Al-Qaeda are my neighbors. I walk in the street, there are killings, there are beheadings. My first week of high school, they blew up the high school. So like my experience from Al-Qaeda is kind of different than I think most of you here. It's not just something I heard on the news or just a 9/11 that I'm maybe living in another state, but I saw it on the news. For me, that was my daily reality, is that these are the people, in a way, were controlling the neighborhood. So it was kind of so everything you saw on the news were literally my daily reality. And that lasted, so we're now, in terms of timeline, we talk from 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7. What happened in 2007 was, for those who follow Iraqi news or not, is that there was a big explosion of one of the leading mosques, Shia mosques in Iraq. It was organized by a guy called Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, who was at the time the leader of Al-Qaeda for Iraq, LQI, which later became known as ISIS. So that's kind of the mother of ISIS. And as a result, now they have become a very militarized opposite reaction, which is more of the Iranian-supported militia. So my neighborhood is literally became in the middle of all of that. So we get rockets flown from Al-Qaeda somewhere, and then rockets from the Shia militants. And with all of that, my rebel self at the time, and at the time I didn't know anything better, would be, well, they don't give us any choice. You either submit to these people or you either fight them. So as somebody who grew up in, as I said, a more moderate household, and some of my friends in high school were against that, we started becoming kind of a more organized group of really young people who just talk about these subjects and really show our opposition to these extremist values. So long story short, which I think we'll talk probably at dinner, is that I ended up on a death list. I mean, that just comes in as a lunch in Iraq. It's like I ended up on a death list. And in a way, it's like I don't really feel special because it's really not hard to trigger Al-Qaeda. I mean, just so I don't show up as the brave person here. It's really not that hard. It could be a woman not wearing a headscarf. That could be enough of a trigger. It could be a journalist. It could be any. Sometimes there were times in which they kill barbers because they shave beards. So even the barber who does not shave beards is in a way an activist. So it was a situation in which basic opposition to basic things is a form of heroism. As a result of that, I had to leave the country. So I left Iraq when I was 18 years old, now I'm 28. Actually, September 9th, 2009 is when I left Iraq. So it's really been a decade since I left. And the goal was for me to go abroad and really save my life. But because of the conflict and all of the war, it's really hard for an Iraqi passport holder to leave the country. So especially leave the countries that are safe. So I ended up to Lebanon, and Lebanon was kind of the gateway that I thought will be able to go to UK. That was the goal. And 3 attempts with hundreds of dollars that I had to spend. It's a rejection after rejection after rejection. Young male, kind of fits the profile, quote unquote. Then I had to stay in Lebanon. Then Lebanon started having its own conflict. I was like, shit, like I just escaped. Like I just left that, and now there is another kind of sectarian style conflict. And so my friend was like, okay, so if you want to get a decent education in a country that is relatively safe and kind of away from where you're from, go to Malaysia. So pack my bags and I go to Malaysia. He was right. Malaysia was actually relatively a much safer country. And over there, I applied for a UNHCR, which is the United Nations Commission for Refugees. And it took me 3 years, and I ended up landing in Houston, Texas in 2003, March 12th, 2003. And I just recently became a citizen. So that's what happened. Thank you. So I landed in America. I was like, wow, this is cool. And I moved to Houston. Then I started talking to companies and all of that about what I've been doing in Iraq, kind of organizing the movement, knowing people who are influencers in the region, activists, journalists. And then there was a project by Google called movements.org, in which, okay, we are kind of the type of guy we want, you know pretty much everybody, come join us so you can be, like, so I consider myself kind of a founder of that platform, in which we call it the match.com for human rights. For those of you who know match.com, so activists, mainly in closed societies, make requests. Oh, I want the journalist, I want aid, I want all of that. And somebody from the West, which is a free society, can offer that service. I'm a journalist at the Wall Street Journal, I want to cover human rights in Afghanistan. We get them connected to human rights activists in Afghanistan. So they started kind of building the experience in kind of more the Western hemisphere. Then one of the inspirations that kind of started my NGO is that growing up in Iraq, of all places and many other locations, is that if you don't speak English, you literally have pretty much no access to most of the world knowledge. But by default, so the UN reported that there are more books translated to Spanish in 1 year than Arabic in 1,000 years. So most of the world knowledge that now we take for granted, accessing through cell phone or the internet, is not available in Arabic. So if you don't, if you do, well, before my organization started, if you do basic research about, okay, what is freedom of religion? There's nothing. There's almost nothing. There's only maybe like 1 or 2 articles, and 2 of these articles are written by extremist websites. So literally, if you are a young, curious, as many of you here in UT Austin or all of that, would like to know more about the world, you literally are sheltered just back to the fact you don't have the access to that language. And so as a result is that, people talk about ISIS and the routes to radicalization and all of that, but the ecosystem in which these young people grow up in have no access to knowledge. The fact that most of us take for granted is not accessible there. So I start pitching the idea that, well, here are the facts. There's very little amount of content in Arabic. Most of the war on terror, the war machine, and all of that, have really been just focused on, okay, we killed Bin Laden, we killed 5 terrorists here. You kill 5, you create 100. You kill 100, you create 1,000. And then it's a kind of an endless cycle. Now it's been, 18 years since 9/11, and we're still looking for the next Al-Qaeda leader, which cave he's hiding in. Which means that the issue is really not the bombs. While it might be kind of put a tape on the solution, okay, might delay another conflict, but it's really not going to solve the root of the problem, which is really the ecosystem in which people like me who grew up there and with so much hopelessness, with so much lack of information, do not have. So I was like, okay, now is the time for me to, now I'm able to establish myself and all of that. I established an organization, mainly focused to change the education system, change the ecosystem, including the education system that young people grow up at. And we've had, so calling it amazing success is an understatement. We've had a tremendous success over, not to use the Trump word, but we've really had a tremendous, the fact that the content we create, we have now, I would say, maybe the largest translation movement the Arab world has ever known. We have roughly 120 translators based from the east to the west, from the east meaning Iraq and west meaning Morocco. And we have translated now 2,400 articles and 12 books. So that adds up roughly somewhere between 4 to 5 million words since we started, on a rate of 250,000 words a month. So we clearly created a very large movement. And one of the main things is that the demand is super high. As of now, our content has been accessed 12 million times, which means the issue is not really the demand, the issue is actually the supply. The fact that many of these young people are really curious and they really want to know about the world, but really there is nothing for them to read. And that kind of constant motivator for me, that what I'm doing is actually has people to read it. And one of the interesting, actually very emotional quotes I get from somebody who lived under ISIS and downloaded Wikipedia. Actually, he knew that ISIS was coming, and he downloaded pretty much most of Wikipedia Arabic, and he was printing it and giving it to his students. I was like, okay, read about, the fact is people really need that have a really good demand for knowledge there. And so yeah, and I think what makes us unique compared to many of the organizations that talk about the counter-extremism and all of that, number one, we also care about the people. I mean, this is an organization from the people, by the people, in a way, and the goal is that the people over there are choosing their own destiny, not having kind of a trickle-down Washington, D.C. approach, is that, oh, we think that is the solution for the Middle East, and therefore we're going to have a bunch of experts, which is not that I'm against expertise. I think expertise is wonderful. But at the same time, it's not relevant to the people who are living there. So for example, I was having a call with people in Fallujah, which is one of the areas that U.S. Army has fought a lot of wars. I was like, hey, from 1 to 10, what do you guys want? I mean, I can give you a translated book of Adam Smith, but what you really want? And he said, Faisal, there are all these 8 companies coming to my areas, and none of the locals have the skills that they can work for them. They don't know how to write a business proposal. They don't know how to pitch how to get their shop built and all of that. So some of these things are very basic stuff. But then it's like you look at some of the 8 organizations, they have this amazingly grandiose, that this is what, maybe they need 50 universities. But the guy, all he needs is really how to write a business proposal. So all of our content, at the beginning we were kind of taking the more advisory board, PhD professors telling us what to translate. But then last year we actually shifted the approach in which we do bi-monthly surveys in which we ask translators and our audience, which is now roughly between 3.5 to 4 million people all across the region, of like, what do you like to see translated? What are the content that you like to see? And yeah, and that has been kind of the second phase of IBB. And I believe that it is literally not to say literally there, but one of them, I'm kind of very shocked that this has not been done before. I mean, there's a part of me that's like, really? There is no article about freedom of religion in Wikipedia Arabic? Literally? Like, I mean, the Iraq war costed $3 trillion. And it only costed $50. I paid a Syrian refugee in Turkey $50, and he did the whole article. And the fact that this article got tens of thousands of views, which means the demand is there. And sometimes there's a kind of a shocker in me. It's like, really, this has not been done before? Not like I'm reinventing nuclear physics in any shape or form. I mean, what I'm doing is really basic stuff, but really can have a huge impact, because I think that one of the main things that extremists always play upon is the black and white world. There are these enemies, and there are the good guys. And I think just making the playing field in which there's a diversity of knowledge that people can access to can really change the mind. They're like, okay, when somebody's telling them that, oh, Yazidis or Christians are the enemy and all of that, and I was like, no, I've read about this Christian, I've read this Yazidi, I've read about this story. So kind of changing the landscape. And now the third phase, I would say, of what I would love to do is really building a movement on the ground. So as of now, most of our work has been digital. And I mean, obviously there are people who are doing it. So we're not doing any machine learning. It's more individuals doing the translation. But the goal is actually have a campus groups and movements on the ground. And we just recently partnered with 2 universities in post-ISIS territories. These are the areas in which literally Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, was giving a talk at. And now we have 10 students that we train for every semester, train them how to become translators, how to be better skilled, and integrate to the global economy. I mean, these are people who wake up every morning and all they see is a destroyed city. And kind of like giving them the hope that, okay, there is somebody out there cares for you, and these are some of the skills that you need to have to develop in your life is, I think, something that we very essential to develop these areas. So that's going to be the third phase of my organization, which we're planning to do as speaking of 2020 being a year of hope, is going to be the year we do. So yeah, so this is my story, and this is Ideas Beyond Borders, and thank you, Austin Institute, for inviting me. Thank you very much.